Welcome to Sleepytime Stories. My name is Christopher. Tonight, let's journey beneath the silver glow of the moon, where whispers travel farther than we ever imagined. Every night, a boy sits by his window, sharing his dreams, his secrets, and his heart with the moon, believing only the night is listening. But far across the world, under the same gentle light, someone else is hearing his words, someone he has never met, yet feels closer to than anyone. So close your eyes, get cozy, and let the moon's promise carry you into a world where love, fate, and the magic of the night connect us all. The night was quiet. The kind of quiet that seeps into your bones, wraps around your chest, and makes you feel like the only soul left in the world. The wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth, the air crisp under the Montana sky. Daniel Carter stood by his window, staring up at the moon. His hands rested on the old wooden frame, fingers tracing the splinters out of habit. The moon hung heavy in the sky, round and bright, casting silver light over the empty fields beyond his house. It had been his only companion for years. "Good night, moon," he whispered, his voice barely louder than the wind. He wasn't sure when he had started talking to it. Maybe when his mother left. Maybe when his father stopped speaking to him. Maybe it was just something he did to feel less alone. But every night, he spoke to the moon as if it could listen. As if it cared. "I had a bad day today. Dad was angry again. He drank too much. But I guess that's nothing new, huh?" The wind stirred the trees, a soft rustling sound filling the silence. The moon, as always, said nothing back. Daniel sighed and leaned against the windowsill. He was 23, but his life felt small, like he had never truly lived beyond this tiny town. His father had once been a good man, back when his mother was around. But after she left, something inside him broke. Daniel had grown up in the shadow of that brokenness. Tonight, the weight of it all felt heavier. His chest ached, his mind restless. He closed his eyes, letting the night air cool his skin. "I just wish." He trailed off. He never finished his wishes. Maybe because he didn't believe in them. Instead, he whispered, softer this time, "Good night, moon. I love you." It was foolish, he knew. But it was a habit. A comfort. And then, something happened. A sound. Soft. Almost like a breath. But not his. His heart stumbled. He opened his eyes, scanning the darkness beyond his window. There was no one. No movement. just the trees swaying gently in the wind. Had he imagined it? He leaned closer to the window, listening. His pulse quickened, his breath shallow. The air was still again. The night, silent. Maybe he was just tired. Shaking his head, he pulled the curtains shut and stepped away. Tomorrow would be the same as every other day. And the day after that. But as he climbed into bed, something stayed with him. The feeling that tonight, someone had been listening. What if someone was listening to Daniel's whispers? What if the moon carried his words to someone else, far across the world? If you want to hear what happens next, make sure to like this video and subscribe to this channel. More stories are waiting for you, ones that will take you places you never expected. The wind carried his voice across the ocean. It traveled over silent waters, through the hush of sleeping cities, past rooftops where lovers lay dreaming, and into the heart of another night. In a small apartment in Barcelona, Spain, a woman sat by her open window, listening. Elara Vasquez had always loved the sound of the wind. It reminded her of childhood, of her mother humming lullabies, of soft whispers that once made her feel safe. But now, at 28, there was no safety. Only loneliness. Only the quiet ache of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. She was engaged to a man she did not love. Mateo Santiago was powerful, respected. The kind of man who walked into a room and made people lower their voices. When he had chosen her, her family had called it a blessing. But blessings weren't supposed to feel like cages. Elara closed her eyes, inhaling the cool night air. The city below was alive, music in the distance, laughter spilling from cafes, cars weaving through narrow streets. But none of it reached her. She had begun listening to the wind months ago. At first, it was nothing. Just a habit. A way to feel less alone. But then, one night, she had heard something. A voice. Soft. Low. Male. Not clear, not enough to form words. Just a whisper carried through the air. And it had reached her. She had thought she was imagining it. Until she heard it again. And again. Every night, it returned. A murmur in the wind, a ghost of a man speaking to the sky. She never understood what he was saying. But she felt the loneliness in his voice. The sorrow. The longing. Tonight, it was there once more. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her arms, letting the night wrap around her. His voice came, barely above a breath. A whisper to the moon. Good night, moon. I love you. Elara's heart ached. She didn't know who he was, didn't know where he was, but she knew what loneliness sounded like. And for the first time, she did something she had never done before. She whispered back, "Good night, stranger." She wasn't sure if the wind carried her words. But on the other side of the world, a man in Montana lifted his head, his heart pounding, his breath caught in his throat. Someone had answered. The night stretched on, heavy and quiet, but Daniel was no longer at peace. He sat up in bed, staring at the window, heart pounding in his chest. Someone had answered. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't his imagination. It was real. A voice, soft, distant, almost carried on the breath of the night, had whispered back to him. The words were simple, but they had shattered everything he thought he knew. Good night, stranger. Daniel's body tingled, his skin tight with unease. He had spent years speaking to the moon, whispering his thoughts into the void, believing no one would ever hear them. It had been safe. But now, someone was listening. He pushed the covers off, his bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped toward the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to peer outside. The field stretched endlessly beneath the moonlight, the old barn standing silent in the distance. The trees swayed in the wind, their dark silhouettes shifting against the sky. Nothing. No one. Daniel swallowed hard, forcing a breath into his lungs. Maybe he was losing his mind. Maybe the loneliness had finally cracked something inside him. But then, why did it feel so real? Carefully, as if afraid to disturb whatever strange force had reached him, he leaned against the window frame and whispered, "Who are you?" Silence. Daniel waited, his ears straining against the night. The only sound was the distant howl of the wind, the soft rustling of leaves. No answer. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling shakily. Maybe it had been a trick. Some freak accident of sound. Maybe he was just desperate to believe that someone, somewhere, had been listening all these years. Still, as he climbed back into bed, his mind refused to quiet. His heart thumped in his chest, his body restless beneath the blankets. Had she, whoever she was, heard him? Would she answer again? Somewhere across the world, a woman sat at her own window, staring up at the same moon, waiting for a whisper to return. She didn't know that, thousands of miles away, a man had heard her. She didn't know that, for the first time in his life, Daniel Carter wasn't just speaking to the night. He was speaking to her. And she was listening. The next night, Daniel couldn't wait for the sun to set. He went through his day like a man living in a dream. His father grumbled about the bills, the old truck refused to start, and the same faces passed him by in town. But none of it mattered, because all he could think about was the voice. Her voice. By the time the sky melted into shades of deep blue, Daniel was already by his window, his heart pounding. The moon was rising, its silver light spilling across the fields. The air smelled of pine and earth, of the cool promise of night. Was she there? Would she answer again? Taking a slow breath, he leaned forward, resting his forehead against the window. His voice was steady, but inside, he felt anything but calm. Are you real? For a long time, there was nothing. Just the wind. Just the night. And then, yes. Daniel sucked in a breath. The response was clear this time. Soft but certain. A whisper, carried by something unseen, reaching across the world to find him. He closed his eyes, gripping the window frame as if it could anchor him. "Who are you?" he whispered. Silence. For a moment, he thought she was gone. But then, Elara. The name sent a shiver through him. He could almost see her, though he had no idea what she looked like. The name alone felt like a secret meant only for him. "Where are you?" Another pause. The hesitation was almost tangible. And then, far away, Daniel swallowed. He knew he should feel afraid. He knew this made no sense. But instead, he felt something else. A connection. A thread tying him to someone he had never met. "Why do I hear you?" This time, she didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was softer, almost sad. "Because you've been speaking to me for a long time." Daniel's pulse roared in his ears. He had always spoken to the moon, believing his words faded into nothing. But what if they hadn't? What if the night had been carrying his voice all along, threading it through the wind, letting it find its way into someone else's life? Someone like Elara. "I don't understand," he admitted. "Neither do I," she whispered. For the first time in years, Daniel wasn't just whispering to the moon. He was whispering to someone who whispered back. Daniel lay awake long after their voices faded into silence. He had never felt anything like this before, this strange, quiet connection to someone he couldn't see. Someone who lived in another world, under the same moon, whispering back to him. Elara. Her name echoed in his mind as he stared at the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of the wind outside. He wanted to know more, needed to know more. But how could he? How could you reach for something that existed only in the dark? On the other side of the world, Elara was asking herself the same thing. She had promised herself she wouldn't speak again. The moment she heard her own voice slip through the night, she had panicked. It wasn't just the mystery of it. It was the danger. Matteo wouldn't understand. Her fiancé was a man who took what he wanted. He saw her as something he had already claimed, and that was what terrified her most. Because no matter how beautiful the cage, it was still a cage. And yet, here she was, sitting by the open window, waiting. Hoping. She didn't know his name. Didn't know who he was. But she knew the sound of loneliness. And his voice carried the same weight as hers. Slowly, hesitantly, she whispered again, "Are you still there?" A pause. Then, "Yes." Elara exhaled, pressing her fingers against her lips, as if to keep herself from saying too much. But he was waiting. "What's your name?" she asked. The wind carried his answer. "Daniel." She smiled, just a little. "Where are you, Daniel?" A long silence stretched between them, as if he wasn't sure he should answer. Then, finally, "Montana." "Montana." She whispered the name to herself. She had never been there, had never even thought about it before. But now, the place felt like something new. Something hers. "And you?" he asked. Elara hesitated. For a moment, she thought about lying. She thought about telling him she was in some faraway place, somewhere meaningless. But she couldn't. Spain. Daniel let out a soft laugh, one that wasn't really a laugh at all, more like disbelief. "Spain," he repeated, like he was testing the word on his tongue. "Yes," she whispered. Daniel let the word settle in his mind. Spain. A country an entire ocean away. And yet, here they were, speaking as if they were just on opposite sides of a wall, a breath away from touching. "This is impossible," he murmured. "I know," she admitted. And yet, neither of them stopped. An impossible connection. A whisper that crosses the world. But will it last? Or will the night take back what it has given? If you're as lost in this story as Daniel and Elara are, don't forget to like and subscribe to Sleepytime Stories. Some connections are too fragile to last forever. For the next week, Daniel and Elara whispered to each other every night. The world around them disappeared when the moon rose. He would sit by his window, waiting for her voice. and she would wait for his, knowing he was there. They spoke of simple things at first. Daniel told her about the ranch, the stubborn old truck, the way the Montana sky stretched wide and endless. Elara told him about the cobblestone streets outside her home, the scent of orange trees in the evening, and the way the ocean looked under the setting sun. But then, the whispers turned softer, more intimate. "Do you ever feel trapped?" she asked one night. Daniel hesitated. Trapped? Elara's breath hitched. She shouldn't have asked. She had almost let too much slip. But something about his voice made her feel safe. "Forget I said anything," she whispered quickly. "No," Daniel said. "Tell me." She swallowed hard. If she told him the truth, he might never whisper back. If she didn't, she might drown in her own silence. So she took a risk. "There's someone in my life," she admitted. "Someone who controls me." Daniel sat up straighter, his pulse hammering. "Elara, are you in danger?" Her silence was louder than words. "Does he hurt you?" he pressed. "Not yet," she whispered. "But he will." Daniel clenched his fists. He didn't know this woman. He had never seen her face. But something inside him burned at the thought of anyone hurting her. "You have to leave," he said. Elara let out a bitter laugh. It's not that simple. It should be. It isn't. Daniel took a breath, steadying himself. Tell me his name." "No," she said quickly. "You can't help me, Daniel. No one can." Daniel hated that. For the first time in his life, he wished he could reach through the night, through the wind, through the moon itself, just to pull her away from whatever held her prisoner. "Elara," he said, his voice steady. "You don't have to whisper alone." She closed her eyes. For years, she had whispered her fears into the dark, believing no one would ever hear them. But now, someone was listening. Elara wasn't sure how it happened, but Daniel became her lifeline. Every night, she whispered to him, spilling pieces of herself into the darkness. And he listened, really listened, as if her words mattered. As if she mattered. She told him things she had never said out loud. About how Mateo wasn't always cruel. How, at first, he had been charming, attentive, a man who made her feel special. Until she realized that his love was a trap, not a gift. "He watches everything I do," she whispered one night. "Even when I don't see him, I know he's there." Daniel's voice was steady, but she could hear the anger simmering beneath it. That's not love, Elara. That's control. She knew that. But hearing him say it made it real. She gripped the edge of the windowsill, staring up at the moon. I want to leave, she admitted. But I don't know how. Daniel was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, almost hesitant. If you had a way out, would you take it? Elara's breath caught. She wanted to say yes. God, she wanted to say yes. But Matteo wasn't just some jealous man. He was powerful, connected. If she ran, he would find her. And then, she didn't let herself finish that thought. It doesn't matter, she said. There is no way out. Maybe there is. She frowned. Daniel, what are you saying? A beat of silence. Then, come to me. Elara's pulse roared in her ears. What? Come to Montana, he said. I'll keep you safe. The words were impossible. Reckless. But for the first time in years, she let herself imagine it. A place where no one knew her name. A sky so big she could finally breathe. A man who listened to her, who spoke her name like she was something more than just a possession. Freedom. Could it be that simple? Elara closed her eyes. No. Nothing was ever that simple. And yet, as she listened to Daniel's steady breathing on the other side of the night, she wondered. What if? A whisper in the dark. A promise of freedom. But some cages are not so easy to escape. Will Elara take the risk? Or is Daniel offering her a dream that can never be real? If you're caught in this story like they are, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. Some choices change everything. Elara couldn't stop thinking about it. Daniel's words had settled deep into her bones, a quiet promise that refused to fade. Come to me. It was impossible. It was reckless. And yet, she wanted it. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a life beyond the walls of Matteo's control. A life where she could wake up without fear, where she could breathe without looking over her shoulder. A life where she was free. But freedom came at a price. Matteo would never let her go. That night, she didn't whisper first. She wasn't sure she should. Maybe it was safer to let Daniel go, to pretend their voices had never found each other across the night. But then, Elara, are you there? Her chest tightened. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of her window. I'm here. a quiet exhale of relief. I thought maybe. He hesitated. You stopped whispering. I should, she admitted. A pause. But you don't want to. She closed her eyes. No. Daniel's voice was steady, careful. Then don't. It's dangerous. I know. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken things. Then, finally, she whispered the question that had been burning inside her all day. How? Daniel didn't ask what she meant. He already knew. I have a plan. Her pulse jumped. Daniel, no. You don't even know me. Why would you risk this? His answer was simple. Because no one should live in fear. Elara swallowed hard. She had spent so long believing there was no way out. That she would never escape Mateo. That she would never be more than his possession. But now, there was Daniel. Tell me. And so, in the quiet of the night, he did. It was risky. If Mateo found out, she wouldn't get a second chance. But if she stayed, she might never get another chance at all. She had to choose. Stay in the life she knew, or take a leap into the unknown. Elara, Daniel whispered, his voice like a promise. It's time. She took a breath and whispered back, okay. Elara barely slept. Daniel's words haunted her, circling her thoughts like a storm. Come to me. I'll keep you safe. She wanted to believe him. But believing meant trusting. And trusting meant risking everything. Morning came too soon. Mateo was already awake when she stepped into the kitchen. He stood by the window, sipping his coffee, staring at the city as if it belonged to him. Maybe it did. He owned everything in her life. Her time. Her choices. Her silence. But not her whispers. Not Daniel. You didn't sleep, Mateo said without turning. Elara forced a small smile. Just restless. He set his cup down. I told you, you worry too much. She nodded, because that was what he wanted. Because arguing with Mateo never ended well. But her heart pounded as she thought of the plan Daniel had whispered to her the night before. A bus ticket. A train. A path that led away from this life and toward something unknown. Freedom. It felt impossible. You're quiet today, Mateo observed, his sharp eyes finally meeting hers. Her stomach twisted. She had to be careful. If he suspected anything. Just tired, she murmured. Matteo studied her for a long moment, as if peeling back layers of her skin. Then he smiled. "We'll go to dinner tonight," he said. "You need a break." A break. He thought taking her to a fancy restaurant, letting her dress up like a doll, would make her forget that she was nothing but his prisoner. But tonight, she would be free. If everything went right. If Daniel was waiting. If she was brave enough to take the first step. She swallowed hard. "That sounds nice," she said softly. Matteo kissed her forehead. "Good girl." She forced herself to smile. But inside, she was already running. She has a choice. Stay in her cage, or take the first step toward freedom. But escape is never simple. And some men never let go. If you're caught in this story like Alara, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. Some whispers change everything. The city lights stretched out below as Alara sat in the passenger seat of Matteo's sleek black car. She should have been terrified. But all she felt was cold. Tonight was the night. The plan was simple. After dinner, she would excuse herself to the restroom, slip out the back door, and disappear into the city. Daniel had arranged everything. A cab would be waiting. A bus ticket already purchased. If she made it onto that bus, she would be gone before Matteo even realized she was missing. "You look beautiful tonight," Matteo said, his hand resting on her thigh. She forced a smile. "Thank you." Inside, she was screaming. She couldn't mess this up. One wrong move, one hesitation, and she would never get another chance. The restaurant was one of Matteo's favorites, an expensive place with dim lighting, soft music, and waiters who never questioned the powerful men they served. Alara barely tasted her food. She kept glancing at the clock, counting down the minutes. Almost time. "You seem distracted," Matteo said, swirling the wine in his glass. Her breath hitched. "Just tired," she said quickly. He tilted his head. "You've been tired a lot lately." Her fingers clenched beneath the table. "Stay calm. Stay careful." "It's nothing," she said. "I think I just need a good night's sleep." Matteo studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled. "Then we'll go home early tonight." Her heart pounded. No. She needed more time. She forced a soft laugh. "I'll be right back," she said, standing. "Just need to use the restroom." Matteo nodded, sipping his wine. Elara turned, walking slowly across the restaurant. Every step felt heavier. Was he watching her? Could he hear the pounding of her heart? The restroom was down a hallway. The exit was just past it. She reached the door. Her fingers curled around the handle. One breath. Two. She pushed. Cool night air hit her skin. She was outside. She was free. The cab was waiting at the corner, just like Daniel had promised. She started walking, then running. Elara. She froze. The voice was soft, dangerous. She turned, her breath catching. Matteo stood in the doorway, watching her. Smiling. Where are you going? Her throat closed. He knew. He had always known. And now, she was trapped. Elara's body locked up. The cold night air wrapped around her, but it wasn't the wind that made her shiver, it was the look in Matteo's eyes. Calm. Patient. Like a predator who already knew its prey had nowhere left to go. The cab was just a few feet away. The driver had the engine running, waiting. She could run. She should run. But Matteo stepped forward, hands in his pockets, his movements slow and controlled. What are you doing, Elara? Her pulse roared in her ears. Lie. Buy time. I just needed some air, she said, her voice barely steady. Matteo sighed, shaking his head like she was a child who had disappointed him. Don't do this, he murmured. Her heart pounded. She took a step back. His eyes darkened. Elara. One step. That's all it would take. One step, and she could bolt to the cab. She could throw herself inside, scream for the driver to go. But Matteo saw the decision before she even made it. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist, yanking her close. She gasped, twisting, struggling. You don't want to do this, he said softly, his grip like iron. She did. She had to. Let me go, she whispered. Matteo exhaled, his fingers digging into her skin. You belong to me, Elara. Did you forget that? A honk. The cab driver was watching. Her last chance. Elara's breath shuddered. Then she did something Matteo never expected. She stomped down on his foot, hard. Matteo cursed, his grip loosening for just a second. It was all she needed. She wrenched free, stumbling toward the cab. Drive, she screamed as she threw the door open. The driver hesitated. Mateo's footsteps pounded behind her. She dove inside. Go. Now. The driver didn't need to be told again. The tires screeched against the pavement as the cab peeled away from the curb. Elara twisted in her seat, heart hammering. Mateo stood in the street, watching. Not angry. Not panicked. Just waiting. As if he already knew this wasn't over. The cab raced through the city streets, weaving between traffic, the lights blurring into streaks of gold and red. Elara's breath came in shaky bursts. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to slow the wild hammering of her heart. She had done it. She had escaped. But the memory of Mateo's face, calm, unreadable, clung to her like a shadow. He hadn't chased her. Because he didn't need to. "You all right, miss?" the cab driver asked, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. She swallowed hard. "Just drive," she whispered. He nodded. She forced herself to focus. The plan wasn't over. The bus station. A one-way ticket. Daniel would be waiting. The city stretched out behind her, growing smaller with every mile. She should have felt safe. She didn't. Her phone buzzed. A message. She didn't have to look to know who it was. Mateo. Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone. A single text. "You're mine, Elara. You know that." She sucked in a sharp breath. He wasn't angry. He wasn't begging. He was simply stating a fact. She turned off the phone. Not anymore. Not ever again. By the time she reached the bus station, her limbs felt heavy, her body weighed down by exhaustion and fear. The station was nearly empty at this hour. A few people sat scattered around, an old man reading a newspaper, a young woman humming softly to a child on her lap. And then, there he was. Daniel. He stood near the ticket counter, hands in his pockets, scanning the room. The moment his eyes found hers, relief flashed across his face. Elara. Her legs nearly gave out as she reached him. He caught her before she could fall, his arms steady, solid. "You made it," he murmured. She gripped his jacket, unable to speak. He pulled back, studying her face. "Did he hurt you?" She shook her head. "He let me go." Daniel's jaw tightened. "No. He's waiting for you to come back." Her throat burned. I won't, she whispered. He searched her eyes, then nodded. Let's go. He took her hand, guiding her toward the platform. Toward freedom. Toward a future that was finally hers. And as they stepped onto the bus, disappearing into the night, the moon watched over them, silent, patient, keeping its promise. She was not alone. Not anymore. She ran. She survived. But some men never stop watching. Some promises are never forgotten. And some stories never truly end. If you want more tales like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. Because sometimes the whispers in the night are just the beginning.